Hello everyone, I'm Cuff's Crime Stories. Many of you like to listen to these videos when you're about to fall asleep. So before you do, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's find a comfortable position, relax, and start diving into tonight's case. Story 1. The rain had been falling for hours, a steady, rhythmic drumming on the old Victorian's roof. It was the kind of rain that lulled you into a gentle introspection, perfect for late-night research. My mug of chamomile tea steamed softly beside me, its warmth a comforting presence against the cool evening air seeping in through the antique window panes. Outside, the gas lamps of Oakhaven glowed with a dim, buttery light, painting long, wavering shadows on the wet cobblestones. It was a town that time seemed to have forgotten, nestled deep within the Catskill Mountains, its history whispered in the creaks of old floorboards and the rustle of ancient leaves. I was here, in Oakhaven, for a story. Not one I'd been assigned, but one that had snagged at my curiosity like a burr on an old woolen coat. It was the tale of the Blackwood Disappearance, a local legend, a ghost story whispered in hushed tones over weak coffee at the diner, a narrative that had been relegated to the realm of folklore rather than fact. But I'd always had a nose for forgotten truths, a feeling that sometimes the most enduring mysteries were the ones the world had simply grown tired of trying to solve. The Blackwood family, Elias, his wife Serafina, and their young daughter Lily, vanished from their sprawling estate on the edge of town one crisp autumn night in 1908. Just gone. No forced entry, no ransom notes, no bodies ever found. Their grand house, Rosewood, stood silent for decades, a monument to a question mark, until it was eventually torn down to make way for a modern development. All that remained were faded photographs, yellowed newspaper clippings, and the lingering scent of unanswered questions. Tonight, my focus was on a collection of Serafina Blackwood's personal letters, recently discovered tucked away in the dusty attic of the Oakhaven Historical Society. The librarian, a delightful woman named Mrs. Gable with a penchant for tweed and local gossip, had allowed me to borrow them, her eyes twinkling with a shared sense of intrigue. "No one's ever really looked at them, dear," she'd said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Just put them in a box and forgot about them." I carefully turned the brittle pages, the faint scent of dried roses and forgotten paper wafting up from the delicate script. Serafina's handwriting was elegant, loops and flourishes telling tales of garden parties, local anxieties about the coming winter, and the usual small-town comings and goings. She seemed, from these letters, to be a woman of quiet strength, a lover of nature, and fiercely devoted to her family. My lamp cast a warm, concentrated pool of light on the desk, illuminating the occasional ink smudge or the faint imprint of a tear. I savored these small details, these intimate glimpses into a lifelong past. They were like tiny breadcrumbs, leading me deeper into the labyrinth of the Blackwood mystery. Then I found it, a letter dated October 27th, 1908, just days before their disappearance. It was addressed to her sister, Agnes, who lived in a distant city. The tone shifted subtly, a tremor of unease rippling beneath the otherwise calm surface of her prose. "Dearest Agnes," she wrote, "I find myself wrestling with a strange disquietude these past few weeks. Elias has grown preoccupied. He spends his days in his study, poring over his maps and ancient texts, his brow furrowed with a seriousness I have not seen before. He speaks of a discovery, a path to something extraordinary, though he will not elaborate. Lily, bless her innocent heart, has taken to whispering about a secret garden her father has promised to show her, one beyond the veil of this world. I confess it chills me, this talk of veils and other worlds, even as I try to dismiss it as a scholar's eccentricity." I paused, a shiver tracing its way down my spine, despite the warmth of the tea. A secret garden beyond the veil of this world. What a peculiar phrase. Elias Blackwood was known as an amateur cartographer and a keen collector of antique maps, particularly those depicting forgotten trails and lost settlements in the more remote regions of the Catskills. Could his discovery be something more than just a forgotten geographical location? The rain intensified slightly, tapping a faster rhythm on the glass. I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders, a sudden chill permeating the cozy room. The next paragraph in Serafina's letter deepened the unsettling atmosphere. The air around Rosewood feels different. There's a hush that has fallen, a silence that isn't peaceful, but rather watchful. The servants speak of peculiar shadows at the edge of the woods, of strange lights in the upper windows at odd hours. Elias dismisses it as superstition, the ramblings of country folk, but I have seen them myself. Fleeting glimpses, perhaps, but enough to stir a nervousness in my heart. He says it's merely the old house settling, or the tricks of the fading autumn light. But I know my home, Agnes, and it has never felt like this before. My fingers traced the delicate pen strokes. It was clear Serafina was troubled, her instincts crying out against Elias's reassurances. What could have caused such a profound shift in the atmosphere of their home, leading to such an intense sense of foreboding? I flipped to the next letter, the final one in the collection, dated October 30th, 1908. It was shorter, more hurried, almost frantic in its tone, a stark contrast to the elegant composure of her previous writings. Agnes, something is happening. Elias is preparing for a journey. He says it is a grand adventure, a fulfillment of his life's work. He insists we must go with him, that Lily will adore it. He speaks of a gate, a threshold. I fear for Lily. She is so young, so trusting. He has shown me a map, Agnes, an ancient parchment-like thing, unlike any I have ever seen. It shows no roads, no towns, only peculiar symbols, and what appears to be a swirling vortex at its center, marked with the words, the Whisperwood Path. He believes it leads to a place of profound beauty and unparalleled knowledge. I believe it leads to somewhere else entirely. The last words were smudged, as if written through tears or with a shaking hand. Somewhere else entirely. The phrase hung in the air, echoing the chilling silence of the Blackwood disappearance. Elias, with his fascination for forgotten maps and hidden paths. Lily, captivated by the idea of a secret garden. Serafina, her heart filled with a mother's protective fear. It all coalesced into a single, profound question. What was on that map? And where did the Whisperwood Path truly lead? I leaned back in my creaking wooden chair, the rhythmic drumming of the rain a soothing backdrop to my churning thoughts. The police investigation in 1908 had yielded nothing. No evidence of foul play, no footprints leading away from the house, no trace of the family's departure. It was as if they had simply evaporated into the thin autumn air. The authorities had concluded it was a voluntary disappearance, perhaps a secret flight for unknown reasons. But Serafina's letters painted a different picture, one of a woman increasingly uneasy, on the cusp of a terrifying, inexplicable journey. I closed my eyes for a moment, picturing the old Rosewood estate. The sprawling gardens, the ancient oak trees, the dark, murmuring woods that pressed in on all sides. It was easy to imagine Elias, consumed by his scholarly pursuits, perhaps stumbling upon some esoteric text, some long-forgotten piece of lore that spoke of hidden places, of passages between worlds. And Lily, a child's imagination readily accepting the fantastical, eager for a secret garden. My gaze drifted to the ancient map resting on the wall above my fireplace. It was an 18th century survey of the Oakhaven area, a gift from Mrs. Gable. I hadn't looked at it closely before, but now a flicker of an idea, a tiny seed of a possibility began to sprout. I pulled it down, the old paper crackling faintly. Its familiar contours showed the winding roads, the contours of the mountains, the meandering river. But then, in the far northwestern corner, where the dense, untamed forest bled into the foothills of a lesser-known peak called Mount Cinder, I noticed something peculiar. A faint, almost imperceptible discoloration, a subtle difference in the paper's texture, as if something had been carefully erased, or perhaps subtly altered. It was barely visible, a ghost of an impression. I fetched my magnifying glass, its polished brass glinting in the lamplight. I held it over the spot, my breath catching in my throat. What I saw was not a complete erasure, but a faint, almost invisible tracing. A series of impossibly delicate lines, barely distinguishable from the natural grain of the aged paper, forming a pattern. It wasn't a road or a trail or a river. It looked circular, like a swirl, a vortex. And then, so faint it was almost a trick of the light, I saw the faint imprints of tiny, antique script, pressed so lightly they were almost lost in the paper's texture. I squinted, straining my eyes in the dim light. It took several tries, adjusting the angle of the lamp, until I could just make out a few letters. W-H-I-S-P-E-R. My heart hammered a slow, deliberate rhythm against my ribs. The Whisperwood Path. Could Elias Blackwood have somehow acquired this very map, perhaps a copy, and then subtly altered it, or enhanced it, to reveal what he believed was a hidden path? It was a wild thought, yet it fit perfectly with Serafina's frantic description of an ancient, symbolic map. The rain began to slow, turning into a soft patter, a gentle lullaby. The air in the room, once charged with the excitement of discovery, now settled into a reflective calm. I sat there for a long time, the magnifying glass still clutched in my hand, the map spread before me, and Serafina's letters fanned out beside it. The Blackwood disappearance was not a solved case, not a simple runaway family. It was a story woven with threads of obscure scholarship, ancient folklore, and a family's descent into the unknown. Elias, perhaps driven by an insatiable intellectual hunger, might have truly believed he had found a gateway to another realm, a secret garden beyond the veil of this world. And Serafina, despite her fear, might have followed him, bound by love and loyalty, into the heart of that mystery, with her innocent daughter in tow. What happened to them? Did they find their secret garden? Or did they simply walk into the deep, unforgiving embrace of the Catskill wilderness, lost to the mists of time and the whispered legends? The truth, perhaps, was far stranger and more beautiful than any ordinary explanation. It was a story not of violence or malice, but of curiosity, of belief, and of an unwavering pursuit of the extraordinary. And as the last drops of rain trickled from the eaves, and the first faint hints of dawn began to paint the sky with soft grays and lilacs, I felt a deep sense of peace. The Blackwood family hadn't just vanished. They had embarked on a journey that still whispered its secrets through the old trees of Oakhaven, waiting for someone to listen. And I, with Serafina's words as my guide, felt a quiet resolve to keep listening, to keep turning the pages, to keep peering into the shadows, hoping to catch another glimpse of that elusive, enigmatic path. For some mysteries, the most profound ones, are not meant to be fully solved, but rather to be gently, reflectively, and perhaps eternally wondered about. Story 2. The wind chimes on my porch tinkled softly, a gentle, ethereal melody carried on the cool evening breeze. It was late, but not unpleasantly so. The kind of late where the world outside seems to fall quiet, leaving you alone with your thoughts and the soft glow of the lamp beside you. My old tabby cat, Jasper, purred contentedly in my lap, a warm, vibrating weight, his fur the color of burnt caramel. Outside, the moon, almost full, cast long, silvery shadows across the overgrown garden, making the ancient oak tree at its edge seem to whisper secrets to the night. I live in Havenwood, a village so small it barely registers on most maps, nestled deep in the rolling hills of Vermont. It's a place where history isn't just in books. It's in the worn flagstones of the town square, the faded paint on the general store, the stories whispered from one generation to the next. I've been a resident here for 15 years now, having moved from the bustle of the city in search of a quieter life, a place where the rhythm of the seasons dictated the pace, not the ticking of a clock. I've found it mostly, but Havenwood, for all its peaceful charm, holds its own shadows, its own untold tales. My particular fascination lies with the village archives, a treasure trove of forgotten lives housed in the old stone library. I volunteer there a few days a week, mostly cataloging, but sometimes a brittle ledger or a faded photograph catches my eye, pulling me into a forgotten narrative. It's how I stumbled upon the story of the Willow Creek ferryman. The official records were sparse, almost dismissive. In the winter of 1928, a man named Silas Blackwood, the sole operator of the Willow Creek ferry, disappeared. His small, flat-bottomed ferry was found adrift, half submerged in the frigid waters of the creek, a solitary or floating nearby. No body was ever recovered. The police, after a perfunctory investigation, concluded he had likely fallen in during a heavy fog and drowned, his body swept away by the swift current. A tragic accident, quickly filed away and largely forgotten. But the villagers, as I soon learned, held a different, more persistent memory. They spoke of the Willow Creek ghost, a spectral figure seen rowing the ferry at dusk on moonless nights, his face obscured by shadow. And more chillingly, they spoke of the Whispering Woods, the dense, ancient forest that bordered the creek, a place where strange lights were sometimes seen, and where, it was rumored, things went missing. Not just Silas Blackwood, but livestock, and even once, a small child who wandered too far from home, never to be seen again. Tonight, my research had taken me back to a collection of old Havenwood journals, meticulously kept by the village midwife, Elara Vance, from the late 1800s to the mid-1930s. Her handwriting was elegant, almost artistic, flowing across the aged pages like a gentle river. She documented births and deaths, illnesses and recoveries, but also, in hushed tones, the undercurrents of village life, the unspoken fears, the local superstitions, the inexplicable occurrences. The air in my study, usually so still, felt a little cooler than usual, a subtle current stirring the heavy velvet curtains. I adjusted the dim yellow light of my desk lamp, casting a warm pool on the open journal. The scent of old paper and dried lavender, pressed between the pages long ago, filled the air, a comforting aroma that somehow intensified the sense of delving into a forgotten past. Ilara's entries about Silas Blackwood began several months before his disappearance. At first, they were mundane. Silas brought the new doctor across the creek today, late evening. A good man, though quiet. Then a shift in tone, a hint of something uneasy. Silas seems preoccupied of late. His usual good humor is dim. I saw him by the creek at twilight, not waiting for a passenger, just standing, gazing into the whispering woods. When I greeted him, he started, as if roused from a deep thought, and simply nodded, his eyes wide. I paused, tracing the faded ink with my finger. What had Silas seen or felt that had so unsettled him? The whispering woods. The name itself was evocative, hinting at ancient secrets, at a place where the veil between worlds might be thin. Further entries revealed a growing unease among the villagers concerning Silas. He began refusing to make late-night crossings, something he had always done without complaint. He seemed to shrink from the encroaching darkness, even in his own home. Silas's wife, Martha, came to me today, her face etched with worry lines. He speaks of things in the woods, shadows that move without wind, sounds that are not of any animal. He says he hears whispers when he is on the creek, faint voices calling his name from the riverbank, from the dark heart of the whispering woods. Martha fears he is losing his mind. A soft thud from outside startled me. Jasper lifted his head, his ears swiveling towards the window, then settled back down, his purr resuming. It was likely just a falling acorn, but in the quiet of the night, with Ilara's words painting vivid pictures in my mind, every sound held a heightened significance. I continued reading, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. The entries grew more concerning, more chilling. The air around Silas has grown cold, even in this warm autumn. He avoids eye contact, speaks in a murmur. He has taken to keeping a strange, gnarled stick by his side, carved with symbols I do not recognize. He calls it his ward, his protection. He says the whispers have grown clearer, calling him by name, inviting him into the woods, promising him something. He won't say what. This detail, the gnarled stick, intrigued me. Was it a local superstition, a charm against malevolent spirits? Or was it something more specific, a response to a genuine, perceived threat? Ilara's final entry concerning Silas was dated January 12, 1928, just 2 days before his disappearance. It was short, hurried, almost frantic in its script, a stark contrast to her usual elegant hand. Silas came to my door tonight, his face pale and drawn in the moonlight. He said he couldn't fight it any longer. The whispers were too strong, the pull too great. He spoke of a path, a threshold in the whispering woods, a place only revealed when the moon was full and the mists lay thick upon the creek. He said he had to go, that they were waiting. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrible, desperate hope, and begged me to tell Martha that he was going home. Then he turned and walked towards the creek, disappearing into the swirling mist that had begun to creep from the woods. I called after him, but he did not answer. Oh God, I fear for his soul. They were waiting. The phrase echoed in my mind, sending a shiver down my spine despite the warmth of Jasper's presence. What were they? And what was this path, this threshold that drew Silas so powerfully? The official report, the one that dismissed it as a simple drowning, suddenly seemed utterly inadequate. It ignored the months of escalating fear, the strange behavior, the chilling last words. It ignored the whispers from the woods. I closed the journal gently, the soft rustle of the pages a mournful sigh. The moon, now higher in the sky, shone directly through my window, painting the room in shades of silver and deep shadow. My gaze drifted to the framed map on my wall, an antique survey of Havenwood from the late 1800s. I'd always loved its intricate details, the delicate hand-drawn trees, the winding depiction of Willow Creek. My eyes found the spot where Willow Creek ran closest to the whispering woods. It was a particularly dense section of forest on the map, marked with a slightly darker shading of ancient growth. I had walked those woods often, finding them beautiful, but also possessing a peculiar stillness, an almost expectant silence. Now, with Ilara's words echoing in my mind, I saw something new. A tiny, almost imperceptible detail in the mapping of the trees. A faint, almost artistic swirl in the very heart of that dense section. A deviation from the regular pattern of tree clusters. It was so subtle, so easily dismissed as a mere flourish of the mapmaker's pen, but now it stood out. It was no natural feature. It was a symbol. A vortex, perhaps, or a gate. I reached for my magnifying glass, its heavy brass cool against my fingertips. I leaned in close, bringing the swirl into sharper focus. And there, almost swallowed by the delicate lines of the drawing, were faint, almost unreadable characters. They were not English or Latin, or any language I immediately recognized. They seemed older, pictographic perhaps, but one symbol, recurring throughout the swirl, caught my attention. It looked like a stylized eye, half closed, almost like a slit. The path, the threshold. Could this almost invisible detail on an old map be what Silas was drawn to? A place that, according to local legend, things went missing? Jasper, sensing my focus, stretched and resettled himself, his purr a low rumble. The wind chimes outside began to sway again, their tinkling melody now seeming less ethereal, more like a fragile warning. The story of Silas Blackwood, the Willow Creek ferryman, was not a story of a man who simply fell into the water. It was the story of a man who was called, drawn by an unseen force, into a place that existed at the very edge of human understanding. It was a story woven into the fabric of Havenwood, a quiet thread in its tapestry of history, a story that the villagers had wisely chosen to remember not as an accident, but as a haunting. What was in the Whispering Woods that night? What whispers had called Silas Blackwood so relentlessly? Did he find the home he desperately sought, a peace beyond the frantic world he had come to fear? Or did he simply step into a void, a place from which there was no return? The moon began its slow descent, its light softening, the shadows outside blurring at their edges. The night was growing deeper, but my mind was clearer than it had been in days. The official conclusion of a drowning now seemed absurd, a hasty explanation to quell fear and curiosity. Silas Blackwood's disappearance was not a case to be closed, but a mystery to be pondered, a subtle enigma that continued to ripple through the quiet heart of Havenwood. I gently stroked Jasper's soft fur, his warmth a comforting anchor in the growing mystery. The scent of old paper and lavender lingered in the air, a whisper from the past, inviting me to listen closer. For some stories, the most profound ones, are not about definitive answers, but about the enduring power of the unknown, the quiet pull of the unexplainable, and the subtle, persistent echoes of lives that vanished, leaving only a compelling, beautiful question mark behind. And as the first faint hint of dawn began to paint the sky a soft, hopeful gray, I knew I would keep listening to the whispers, keep searching the shadows for the secrets of the Willow Creek ferryman, a story that Havenwood had never truly solved, and perhaps never would. Story 3. The old house settled around me with a familiar sigh, the kind of gentle creak and groan that only comes from decades of standing firm against the elements. Outside, a soft, insistent drizzle whispered against the window panes, a soothing accompaniment to the quiet hum of the ancient refrigerator in the kitchen. I adjusted the dim, warm glow of my reading lamp, its light pooling over the worn armchair and the book open on my lap. It was a local history text, one I'd found tucked away in the dusty corner of a second-hand shop here in Havenwood, a small village nestled in the foothills of the Adirondacks. I moved to Havenwood 5 years ago, drawn by the promise of quiet solitude and a slower pace. I'd spent too many years chasing headlines in bustling cities, and I craved the gentle rhythm of a place where time seemed to unfurl more deliberately. Now, I spend my days tending my small garden, walking the meandering trails that spiderweb through the surrounding forests, and increasingly, delving into the forgotten narratives that lie beneath Havenwood's placid surface. The village, for all its serene beauty, has a way of holding on to its past, like secrets whispered in the rustle of autumn leaves. My current quiet obsession revolves around the disappearance of the Holloway family in the spring of 1937. It's a story largely unheard of outside Havenwood, having been overshadowed by larger, more dramatic events on the national stage. But here, in hushed tones over cups of strong coffee at the diner, or in the hushed reverence when someone mentions the old Holloway farm, the mystery persists. The Holloways, Samuel, his wife Eleanor, and their 2 young children, Thomas, aged 7, and Clara, just 5, lived on a sprawling, somewhat isolated farm at the very edge of Havenwood, bordering what locals call the Whispering Pines, a vast, ancient stretch of forest known for its deep stillness and peculiar echoes. One morning, the neighbor, Mrs. Gable, went to borrow some eggs and found the farmhouse door ajar, the breakfast table laid, and no one there. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no notes. Just an eerie, profound emptiness. The local sheriff, a stoic man named Jedediah Thorne, conducted a thorough search, but the dense forest offered no clues, and the farm itself revealed nothing untoward. The official conclusion was a voluntary disappearance, perhaps a flight from debt, or simply a desire for a new life. But even then, there was a palpable unease, a sense that something more profound and less explicable had transpired. Tonight, my focus was on a collection of old newspaper clippings I'd meticulously gathered from the village library's archives. They were yellowed and brittle, smelling faintly of dust and forgotten hopes. The language was formal, yet carried an underlying sense of bewildered curiosity. I carefully smoothed a clipping from the Havenwood Chronicle, dated April 23, 1937, just a few days after the Holloways vanished. The headline read in sober, almost regretful type, "Holloway family vanishes without trace, local authorities baffled." The article itself was brief, recounting the facts as they were known. The neighbor's discovery, the search efforts, the lack of evidence. But a paragraph towards the end caught my eye, a detail often overlooked in the grander narrative of the disappearance. Sheriff Thorne noted the peculiar silence of the Holloway farm. Even the animals, cows in the pasture, chickens in the coop, seemed unnaturally quiet, exhibiting no signs of distress. The family dog, a loyal collie named Bess, was found curled on the porch, whimpering softly, and refused to leave the threshold of the open farmhouse door for days. I paused, picturing it. A farm, usually teeming with the sounds of animal life, rendered silent. A loyal dog, a creature of instinct and unwavering devotion, whimpering at an open door, refusing to enter a home that was no longer home. It was a subtle detail, but profoundly unsettling. It hinted at a deep, unnatural stillness, a profound disruption to the natural order of things. The drizzle outside had intensified slightly, a gentle, consistent drumming that seemed to amplify the quiet of the house. Jasper, my large ginger cat, usually a creature of boundless energy, was curled tightly on the foot of my armchair, his breathing deep and even. Even he seemed to be attuned to the quiet introspection of the evening. I moved to another clipping, this one an editorial from a few weeks later, reflecting on the ongoing mystery. It spoke of the village's collective bewilderment, the rumors that swirled like autumn leaves, and the general feeling of helplessness. But one sentence, buried deep within the prose, resonated with a particular chill. Old Man Hemlock, who has lived by the Whispering Pines for nigh on 80 years, claims to have seen a light in the woods on the night of the Holloway's disappearance. A soft, ethereal glow, unlike any lantern or natural phenomenon. He spoke of a feeling of pull, a sense that something was beckoning from the depths of the forest. Old Man Hemlock. He was long gone, of course, but his words, recorded in the dry language of the newspaper, still carried a faint echo of an inexplicable experience. A light in the woods. A pull. This wasn't the language of human flight or mundane misfortune. It spoke of something else entirely. I remembered a conversation I'd had with Mrs. Henderson, a delightful woman in her late 80s who still lived in the house her grandparents had built, just down the road from the old Holloway farm. She remembered the disappearance, though she was only a child then. "My grandmother always said it was the whispering wind, dear," Mrs. Henderson had told me, her voice a soft murmur, her eyes gazing distantly out her kitchen window at the dense line of the whispering pines. Not the kind of wind that rattles the windows, but the kind that gets inside your head. Calls to you, especially at twilight. She'd paused, stirring her tea, a faint tremor in her hand. "They say young Clara, the Holloway girl, she used to wander off. A dreamy child, always looking up at the sky or into the woods. Her mama would find her sometimes, just standing there listening. Eleanor, bless her heart, would say, 'Clara, what are you doing?' And Clara would just smile and say, 'The trees are talking, Mama. They're telling me stories.' A dreamy child, listening to the trees. It added a layer of profound, unsettling poignancy to the story. Had Clara, with her innocent openness, been more attuned to something others couldn't perceive? And had that something ultimately drawn her family into its embrace? I looked around my own study, the familiar objects, my collection of antique maps, the scent of old books that permeated the air, the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, felt solid and reassuring. Yet, the story of the Holloways, with its elusive details and lingering questions, created a subtle ripple in that comforting sense of reality. I turned back to the newspaper clippings, specifically looking for any mentions of Samuel Holloway's interests or activities leading up to the disappearance. He was described as a quiet, hard-working farmer, devoted to his family. But one brief mention, in a neighbor's recollection, sparked a flicker of recognition. He had a strange book, Samuel did. The neighbor was quoted as saying, Old thing, leather-bound. He'd sit on the porch of an evening, after his work was done, just reading it. Not a Bible, mind you. Something older. He told me once it was about forgotten paths. Didn't think much of it at the time, just Samuel being Samuel, a bit of a dreamer beneath that stern farmer's exterior. A strange book, Forgotten Paths. The phrase resonated with the unsettling atmosphere of the whispering pines, with the idea of a pull from the woods, a light. Could Samuel Holloway, perhaps in his quiet evenings, have stumbled upon some ancient lore, some forgotten knowledge that spoke of passages or thresholds known only to a few? The thought was a whisper of possibility, almost too fantastic for the calm reality of my study, yet it fit the elusive pieces of the puzzle with a disturbing precision. It wasn't a tale of violence or malice, but of something far more subtle and profound, a deliberate, perhaps even willing, step into the unknown. I shifted in my armchair, feeling the familiar give of the worn springs. Jasper stirred, stretching a paw with slow, deliberate grace, then settling back into his peaceful slumber. The rain continued its soft symphony outside, washing the world clean, leaving it fresh and new, yet unable to erase the lingering shadows of the past. The police investigation, as I'd read in Sheriff Thorne's archived reports, focused solely on the mundane. Financial woes, marital strife, any ordinary reason a family might simply pack up and leave. But there was no evidence for any of it. The Holloway family was, by all accounts, content, hardworking, and deeply rooted in their community. Their vanishing simply didn't fit the usual patterns of human behavior. And then, there was the detail of the children's toys. A small wooden soldier, Thomas's favorite, found carefully placed on his pillow. Clara's worn rag doll, left neatly on her bed. These weren't signs of a frantic departure or an abduction. They were signs of care, of a family leaving as if they intended to return, or as if they were stepping into a different kind of order, one where their cherished possessions would be waiting for them. The mystery of the Holloways, after all these years, remains an open wound in Havenwood's quiet history. There are no answers, no definitive conclusions, only the lingering question mark, etched into the collective memory of the village. And perhaps that is precisely the point. Not every mystery is meant to be solved with logical precision. Some, the ones that truly resonate, are meant to be felt, to be pondered, to be allowed to breathe in the quiet spaces of our understanding. I closed the local history book, its pages exhaling the scent of forgotten paper and quiet contemplation. The rain was beginning to subside, the drumming on the window now just a gentle sprinkle. The sky outside was still dark, but a faint, almost imperceptible lightning was beginning to happen at the very edge of the horizon. What truly happened to the Holloways? Did they walk into the whispering pines, drawn by some unseen force, some ancient knowledge unearthed from Samuel's strange book? Did they find a forgotten path to a different kind of existence, a place where their dreamy child Clara could truly talk to the trees? The answer, I suspected, lay not in police reports or logical deductions, but in the realm of subtle possibilities, in the quiet spaces between the known and the unknown. And as the world outside began its slow, gentle awakening, I knew I would continue to turn the pages, to listen to the whispers of the past, to let the unsolved mystery of the Holloway family linger in the quiet corners of my mind. For in Havenwood, some stories are not about finding the truth, but about embracing the enduring, captivating enigma of what might be. And that, in its own way, felt like a comforting thought, a quiet mystery to hold close as the world outside began its gentle hum once more. Story 4. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, a comforting presence against the cool evening air that seeped through the old stone walls of my cottage. Outside, the wind, a restless spirit tonight, sighed through the ancient pines that bordered my property, a sound both lonely and peaceful. My mug of herbal tea, fragrant with lavender and chamomile, warmed my hands, and the scent of old paper and beeswax polish from the antique desk I inherited filled the air. I adjusted the dim, buttery light of my desk lamp, casting a warm pool over the brittle, foxed pages of the journal before me. I live in Blackwood Creek, a tiny hamlet tucked away in the sprawling, often mist-shrouded valleys of coastal Maine. It's a place where the sea whispers secrets to the land, and where time often feels less like a linear progression and more like a gentle ebb and flow, carrying memories and stories on its tide. I came here 5 years ago, seeking refuge from the relentless pace of urban life, hoping to find a quiet corner to write. I found that, and something more, a deep, almost instinctual connection to the stories that linger in the very air of this place. My current quiet pursuit, the the one that often keeps me up long after the stars are out, is the perplexing disappearance of Alara Vance. Not the Alara Vance of my previous musings, but another, a local botanist and amateur folklorist who vanished from Blackwood Creek in the autumn of 1968. It's a story known here, but rarely spoken of outside the hushed confines of private conversations. It's a story that never quite closed, never quite settled into the neat box of solved. The official account, as recorded in the local police blotter and a few brief newspaper articles from the time, was frustratingly sparse. Alara, a woman in her late 40s, had gone on one of her regular expeditions into the dense, coastal forest that led down to the treacherous cliffs overlooking the sea. She was known for her solitary rambles, her deep knowledge of local flora, and her fascination with old local legends. Her husband, Arthur, reported her missing when she didn't return by dusk. A search was mounted, involving local volunteers and the state police. They found her canvas satchel, containing her field notes and a small tin of dried berries, perched on a mossy boulder near the old lighthouse path. But no trace of Alara herself. The official conclusion was a tragic accident, a fall from the cliffs, her body swept out to sea by the powerful tides. But the villagers, even then, whispered otherwise. Tonight, my focus was on Alara's personal journal, a leather-bound volume I'd carefully acquired from a distant relative of hers who had inherited it. It was given to me with a curious mixture of reverence and unease, as if the journal itself held secrets that were best left undisturbed. The pages were filled with Alara's elegant script, detailing her botanical observations, her musings on the changing seasons, and increasingly, her notes on the local folklore she was so diligently collecting. The wind outside stirred the branches of the pines, creating a sound like distant murmuring. I pulled the worn woolen blanket I kept draped over my armchair a little tighter, its warmth a comforting weight against the subtle chill that seemed to emanate from the journal itself. Alara's entries, at first, were beautifully mundane. She described the delicate bloom of a rare orchid she'd found, the shifting colors of the marshlands at dawn, the unique properties of certain native herbs. But as the autumn of 1968 deepened, a new thread began to weave its way through her observations. She started noting the growing prevalence of a particular local legend, the Whispering Stones of Blackwood Creek. The old fishermen speak of them, she wrote, her penmanship still precise, but with a subtle tension now evident in the strokes. A cluster of ancient, weather-worn stones deep within the forest close to the sea. They say the stones sing when the tide is low and the fog is thick, and that those who hear their song are sometimes drawn. I paused, picturing the landscape. The ancient stones, their surfaces likely covered in moss and lichen, hidden deep within the shadowy embrace of the forest. The low tide, the creeping fog, conditions that would create a profound sense of isolation, of being utterly alone with the elements. Alara's subsequent entries revealed a growing fascination with these whispering stones. She began to research them in earnest, cross-referencing local oral histories with old maps and geological surveys. She noted the strange, almost magnetic pull she felt towards the area where the stones were rumored to be. Today, I felt a peculiar resonance near the old path to the lighthouse, she penned, the date October 15, 1968, just weeks before her disappearance. A faint hum, like the distant memory of a melody. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniably present. The old tales say the stones are gateways, not to other places, but to other states of being. A liminal space, where the boundaries between here and elsewhere become permeable. A liminal space. The term, often used in anthropology and folklore, refers to a transitional or in-between state or place. It conjured images of misty thresholds, of places where the familiar suddenly gives way to the strange. This wasn't the language of a woman about to fall from a cliff. This was the language of a seeker, a scholar on the verge of a profound, perhaps dangerous, discovery. The wind outside seemed to pick up, its soft sighing now a more insistent murmur against the window panes. My teacup, forgotten for a moment, had grown cool. I took a slow sip, the calming lavender doing little to quell the rising tide of curiosity within me. Alara's final entries were filled with a growing sense of anticipation, mingled with a quiet, almost resigned acceptance. She spoke of the song, of the stones becoming clearer, more insistent. "The fog is rolling in thick tonight," she wrote, her last entry dated October 28, 1968, the very day she vanished. "The tide is at its lowest. The hum is undeniable now, a deep, resonant tone that calls to something ancient within me. I believe I have found the location of the Whispering Stones." They are not merely geological formations, as the skeptics claim. They are resonant structures, perhaps even acoustic focal points for something else. Her hand, usually so steady, showed a slight tremor in these last words. I must go. The pull is too strong to resist. I feel no fear, only a profound sense of rightness. It is as if I am meant to hear this song, to walk this path. Arthur will worry, I know, but some journeys, once begun, cannot be turned from. The stones are singing, and I must listen. The journal ended there. No more entries. Just the blank, silent pages that followed, a stark testament to her abrupt departure. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment, letting the subtle details wash over me. The low tide, the thick fog, the singing stones, the liminal space. It painted a picture utterly at odds with a simple accidental fall. Alara, with her meticulous nature and her deep understanding of the natural world, was not a clumsy woman. And the idea of her simply losing her footing on a well-known path, especially when she was so keenly aware of her surroundings, felt increasingly implausible. The official conclusion, a fall from the cliffs, seemed a convenient way to close a perplexing file. But what if Alara had not fallen from the cliffs, but rather had walked into something from the cliffs? What if the song of the stones, the pull she felt, led her not to physical danger, but to a different kind of threshold? I shifted my gaze to an old hand-drawn map of Blackwood Creek and the surrounding forest, tacked to the corkboard above my desk. It was a local's map, created in the early 20th century, filled with quaint annotations and personalized details. I'd spent hours studying it, trying to pinpoint the rumored location of the Whispering Stones. Near the old lighthouse path, precisely where Alara had described feeling that peculiar resonance, I'd always noticed a cluster of faded, almost erased marks. They were indistinct, like water stains on the parchment, but tonight, with Alara's journal fresh in my mind, they seemed to take on a new significance. They weren't random splotches. They were arranged in a circular pattern, faint, but undeniably there. And at their very center, a tiny, almost invisible symbol, like a stylized wave or a ripple. Could this be it? The approximate location of the Whispering Stones? A place that, to an observant eye, might hold a secret that transcended ordinary understanding? The fire in the hearth crackled, a sudden burst of warmth illuminating the room. Jasper, my elderly tabby, who had been curled in a tight ball on the rug, stirred and let out a soft, sleepy yawn. Even the subtle changes in the room seemed to carry a meaning tonight. The story of Alara Vance wasn't about a missing person in the conventional sense. It was about a woman who, through her deep curiosity and scholarly pursuit of local lore, may have stumbled upon something profound and perhaps entirely non-physical. Her disappearance wasn't a tragedy of the body, but perhaps a journey of the spirit, a passage into a realm that most of us are simply not equipped to perceive. What happened to her? Did she walk into a literal threshold opened by the resonant frequency of the Whispering Stones, stepping into a liminal space where the ordinary rules of reality no longer applied? Did she become part of the forest, a new whisper in the ancient pines, a new song in the wind? The questions lingered, floating in the quiet air of my study, suspended between the flickering firelight and the dim lamp glow. Blackwood Creek had never truly solved the mystery of Alara Vance, and perhaps that was the way it was meant to be. Some stories are not about definitive answers, but about the enduring power of the unknown, the subtle pull of the inexplicable, and the quiet beauty of a truth that remains just beyond our grasp. As the last embers in the hearth faded to a soft, orange glow, and the wind outside began to hush its restless murmur, I felt a deep sense of peace. The journal lay open, its pages silent, yet filled with the echoes of a woman's extraordinary final journey. Alara Vance had not just vanished. She had followed a call, a song, into the heart of a mystery that continued to whisper its secrets through the fog and the pines of Blackwood Creek. And I, with her words as my guide, felt a quiet resolve to keep listening, to keep observing, to keep pondering the quiet, unsolved beauty of her story, a story that, in its very elusiveness, held a truth more compelling than any simple explanation. Story 5. The gentle murmur of the rain outside was a familiar lullaby tonight, a soft percussion against the old cabin's corrugated tin roof. It's a sound I've come to cherish, a comforting backdrop to the quiet introspection that fills my evenings here in Whispering Pines, a small, almost forgotten settlement tucked deep within the remote corners of the Pacific Northwest. My mug of steaming mint tea rested on the reclaimed wood table beside me, its warmth a small, steady comfort in the cool mountain air. The dim yellow light of my hurricane lamp cast long, dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls, illuminating the well-worn pages of the old forestry ledger open on my lap. I moved to Whispering Pines a few years ago, drawn by an almost magnetic pull to its untouched wilderness and the promise of a life lived closer to the pulse of the natural world. I'd spent 2 decades as a librarian in a sprawling city, surrounded by endless stacks of knowledge, but always longing for a deeper connection to the stories that live beyond the written word. Here, among the ancient trees and the hushed valleys, I found a different kind of archive, one whispered by the wind, etched in the rings of fallen timber, and sometimes recorded in dusty, forgotten documents like the one I held now. My current quiet endeavor, the one that has truly taken root in my imagination, is the perplexing disappearance of a small group of logging surveyors in the summer of 1923. It's a local legend, a quiet echo in the valley, rarely spoken of outside the hushed tones of generational memory. The official records, sparse and dismissive, declared them lost to the unforgiving wilderness, a tragic but common occurrence in those early days of logging. But the lingering questions, the subtle anomalies in the sparse reports, suggested something far more intricate. There were 4 of them: Elias Thorne, the lead surveyor, known for his meticulous maps and unwavering dedication; his younger brother, Caleb, new to the job but eager to learn; and 2 seasoned lumberjacks, Thomas and William, quiet men of the forest. They were tasked with charting new timberland in an undeveloped section of the valley, a particularly dense area known locally as the Shadowed Basin, due to the way the towering peaks kept it in perpetual twilight. They set out on a clear August morning, waving goodbye to the few residents of Whispering Pines, promising to return in 2 weeks. They never did. The search parties, composed of local trappers and a few law enforcement officials from the nearest town, found their camp roughly a week after they were due back. It was orderly, almost pristine, tents neatly folded, cooking gear cleaned and stacked, personal effects still within. Their provisions were untouched. The only things missing were their surveying instruments, their axes, and of course, the men themselves. No signs of struggle, no overturned earth, no broken branches suggesting a hurried departure. Just absence, a profound, inexplicable void. Tonight, my attention was held captive by an old forestry ledger, its brittle cover embossed with faded gold lettering. It was from the personal effects of a long-deceased forest ranger, a man named Bartholomew Bart Finch, who had been part of the initial search party. Bart was known in his later years for his quiet nature and his meticulous record-keeping, often sketching small, intricate details in the margins of his official reports. I had unearthed this ledger tucked away in a box of old tools at a local estate sale, its pages smelling faintly of pine needles and damp earth. I carefully turned the age-yellowed pages, the faint scent of charcoal and pencil lead wafting up to me. Bart's handwriting was surprisingly neat, the entries methodical, detailing tree types, land contours, and logging progress. But then, interspersed with the factual notations, were subtle, almost hesitant sketches and observations that hinted at a deeper, less tangible reality. The rain outside intensified slightly, a more insistent drumming now against the tin roof, echoing the quiet rhythm of my own heartbeat. My ginger cat, Marmalade, usually sprawled elegantly on the rug, had curled herself into a tight, watchful ball on the window seat, her eyes slits in the lamplight, fixed on some unseen movement in the dark outside. Bart's entries concerning the missing surveyors began with the official facts, mirroring the newspaper reports. But then a subtle shift in tone, a note of personal bewilderment. Camp found. No trace of men. Provisions untouched. Unnatural silence in the basin. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath there. I paused, tracing the faint penciled lines. Unnatural silence. This was a common thread in many of the unverified accounts of the Shadowed Basin. A profound quietness that seemed to absorb all sound, leaving only a disconcerting emptiness. Further entries revealed Bart's growing unease, his attempts to rationalize the inexplicable. He noted the perfect condition of the campsite, the lack of any disturbance, a detail that profoundly bothered him. No animal tracks within the perimeter of the camp, save for a few deer prints from days before, he wrote, his sketch in the margin depicting a perfectly ordered tent, a neat stack of firewood. No sign of bear or wolf or even small scavengers, as if the very forest held itself away from the clearing. This detail, the absence of animal life around the deserted camp, sent a quiet shiver down my spine. The wilderness is rarely truly still. Even in the deepest quiet, there is the rustle of leaves, the scurry of small creatures, the distant call of a bird. A profound, unnatural silence, a void in the symphony of the forest, suggested a disruption that transcended the simple explanation of human disappearance. Bart's entries grew more reflective, more philosophical, as the days turned into weeks with no new leads. He began to question the very nature of the forest, the idea that certain places held a different kind of energy, a different kind of boundary. Spoke with old man Silas today, the trapper who lives deepest in the valley. Bart penned, the date now late September, the crispness of autumn beginning to creep into the air. He spoke of the singing stones in the shadowed basin, a place where the air hums and the ground vibrates, especially when the moon is new and the mist rolls in thick from the peaks. He says it's a place where the veil is thin, where things can slip between worlds. The singing stones. The veil is thin. The language of folklore and ancient belief, woven into the practical observations of a forest ranger. It wasn't a report to be taken literally, perhaps, but it spoke of a prevailing local belief, a persistent legend that offered an alternative, unsettling explanation for the inexplicable. Bart's final entry concerning the surveyors, dated early October, just before the search was officially called off, was short, almost mournful. The search is ended. No trace. No answers. But I saw it on my last patrol through the basin, near where Silas spoke of the singing stones. Not a light, not a sound, but a shimmering. A distortion in the air, like heat rising from a summer road, but cold. And then gone, like a ripple in a still pool. Some places are not meant to be charted, not meant to be disturbed. Some paths lead elsewhere. A shimmering, a distortion in the air. Not a simple disappearance into the rugged terrain, but a crossing of a different kind of boundary. This wasn't a man falling down a crevice or being swept away by a sudden flood. This was a glimpse of something beyond the realm of ordinary perception. I closed the ledger gently, its old leather cover soft beneath my fingers. The rain had settled into a steady patter, the wind a low whisper through the pines. Marmalade had uncurled herself and was now kneading softly at the window frame, her gaze still fixed on the unseen, her purr a low, rhythmic thrum. The official conclusion, lost to the wilderness, suddenly felt profoundly inadequate. The careful camp, the untouched provisions, the profound silence, the absence of animal tracks, the old trapper's tales of singing stones, and Bart Finch's final, unsettling observation of a shimmering distortion. It all coalesced into a narrative far more intriguing than a simple accident. What truly happened to Elias, Caleb, Thomas, and William that summer day in the shadowed basin? Did they stumble upon a place where the very fabric of reality was different? Did the singing stones open a threshold, a thin veil? And did the men, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps drawn by an irresistible force, simply walk through it, into an elsewhere that existed just beyond the visible world? The thought was not violent, not disturbing, but profoundly curious. It offered a kind of peace, a sense that perhaps they hadn't suffered, but had simply moved on, to a place unburdened by the complexities of our world. The lamp flickered slightly, a gentle reminder of the finite nature of light in the vast darkness. The smell of old paper and pine needles mingled in the air, a scent that now, in my mind, was inextricably linked to the unsolved mystery of the shadowed basin. Whispering Pines holds its secrets close. The forest does not give up its mysteries easily. And perhaps the true essence of this particular story lies not in finding a definitive answer, but in the quiet contemplation of the unknown, the subtle wonder of what lies just beyond the edges of our perception. As the rain continued its gentle, rhythmic descent, and the first faint hints of dawn began to paint the distant sky with soft grays and blues, I knew I would keep returning to this story. Not to solve it, perhaps, but to sit with it, to ponder its quiet complexities, and to let the enduring enigma of the vanished surveyors continue to whisper its secrets through the ancient trees of whispering pines. For some truths, the most intriguing ones, are found not in certainty, but in the quiet, comforting embrace of the unanswered question. Story 6. The scent of rain-soaked earth and old wood always reminds me of home, here in Havenwood, a small, sleepy village nestled deep in the Catskill Mountains. Tonight, the rain is a soft, persistent whisper against the attic window of my ancestral home, a rhythm that has lulled generations of my family to sleep. I'm sitting at my great-grandmother's writing desk, its polished surface glowing softly under the dim yellow light of a single oil lamp. A mug of warm spiced cider rests beside me, its steam curling lazily into the cool night air. My cat, a dignified calico named Persephone, is curled in a tight, purring knot on the worn Persian rug at my feet. I moved back to Havenwood 5 years ago, leaving behind the ceaseless hum of a city I'd grown tired of. I inherited this old house, and with it, a quiet, almost sacred duty to tend to the family archives. My great-grandmother was a meticulous chronicler of village life, a quiet observer who filled countless journals with the small joys and sorrows of Havenwood, and sometimes with its lingering mysteries. One particular mystery has woven itself into the fabric of my quiet life here, a thread of unresolved questions that feels both distant and intimately close. The disappearance of the Thorne family in the summer of 1912. It's a story whispered in hushed tones, a local legend rather than a sensational headline. The few official records are stark in their simplicity, almost dismissive, suggesting a simple, inexplicable vanishing. But my great-grandmother's journals, filled with her keen observations and subtle details, paint a far more intriguing and unsettling picture. The Thorne family, Elias, a quiet, scholarly man who taught at the village school, his wife Martha, known for her beautiful embroidery and gentle demeanor, and their young daughter Lily, a bright-eyed child with a particular fondness for drawing, lived in a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of Havenwood, bordering the ancient, sprawling expanse of what locals called the Whispering Woods. One sweltering August morning, a neighbor, noticing the unusual stillness around the farmhouse, went to check on them. The door was unlocked, the breakfast half-eaten on the table, a book left open by Elias's armchair. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no notes. Just an eerie, profound absence. The local sheriff, a distant cousin of Elias, conducted a search, but the dense, unforgiving woods yielded no clues. The nearest town's newspaper carried a brief, matter-of-fact report, concluding that the family had simply left, perhaps seeking a new life away from the quiet routines of Havenwood. But the village, then as now, knew better. There was a quiet certainty that the Thornes had not simply walked away. Tonight, my attention was drawn to a series of entries in one of my great-grandmother's journals, specifically from the summer of 1912. Her hand, usually so elegant and flowing, showed a subtle tremor in these particular pages, as if the very act of writing about the events caused a ripple of unease. The paper itself, delicate and cream-colored, seemed to absorb the dim lamplight, casting a soft glow on her carefully chosen words. The rain outside picked up, a more insistent patter now, like 1,000 tiny footsteps on the roof. Persephone, usually a creature of calm, twitched an ear and opened one golden eye, before settling back into her purring slumber. My great-grandmother's initial entries about the Thornes were mundane, reflecting the quiet rhythms of village life. She noted Elias's dedication to his students, Martha's skill with a needle, and Lily's boundless energy. But then, a subtle shift in tone began to emerge, a hint of something unsettling creeping into the fabric of her observations. "Martha Thorne came to me today," she wrote, her elegant script filling the page. Her face, usually so serene, was troubled. She spoke of Elias's increasing preoccupation. He spends his evenings not with his books of poetry, but with dusty, ancient tomes brought from the city, books on forgotten languages and symbols. He speaks of resonances in the woods, of a unique vibration near the old standing stones on the edge of the Whispering Woods. Martha fears he is overworking himself, or worse, that his mind is being swayed. I paused, picturing the old standing stones. They were a local landmark, a cluster of rough-hewn megaliths that stood in a clearing deep within the Whispering Woods. Local children, including my own ancestors, had always been warned to avoid them, not out of malice, but out of a deep-seated, unspoken sense of something being other about them. They were a place of old tales, of lingering echoes. My great-grandmother's subsequent entries deepened the sense of unease. She noted changes in Elias's demeanor, a quiet intensity that replaced his usual gentle nature. "Elias has lost weight," she observed, her pen seemingly hovering with concern. His eyes, once soft, now hold a strange, distant glint. He speaks to no one but Lily about his pursuits, whispering to her of a secret song only they can hear from the woods. Martha says Lily, who used to be so outgoing, has become withdrawn, spending hours by her window, gazing into the ancient trees, sometimes humming a tune Martha doesn't recognize. A secret song, a unique vibration. Lily drawn to the woods, humming an unknown melody. It painted a picture of a gradual, almost magnetic pull, rather than a sudden, violent event. It suggested a shared experience, a connection forged in the quiet hours spent delving into the unknown. The air in the attic, usually still, felt a little cooler now, a subtle current stirring the old lace curtains at the window. The scent of old paper and the subtle tang of iron from the well-used inkwell seemed to intensify. My great-grandmother's final entry regarding the thorns, dated August 15, 1912, the very day they vanished, was short, almost breathless in its urgency. The strangest thing today, a profound stillness has fallen over the thorn farm. No birdsong, no rustle of leaves, and a faint, almost imperceptible hum in the air, a vibration that seems to come from the very ground beneath my feet. I walked past the farmhouse at dusk, on my way home from visiting Mrs. Gable. The door was ajar, and I heard Lily's voice, clear as a bell, singing a melody I have never heard before, a tune that seemed to call from the very heart of the whispering woods. It was not a child's song. It was ancient, and Elias's voice, a low murmur, speaking of a new path, a final threshold. I did not knock. I could not. There was a sense of something profound happening within that quiet space. A moment held outside of time. I fear for them, for what they have found, or what has found them. A new path, a final threshold. A moment held outside of time. The words resonated with a quiet, unsettling power. This was not the language of mundane human affairs. It was the language of an encounter with something deeply mysterious, something that transcended the ordinary. I closed the journal, its old leather cover warm beneath my touch. The rain outside had softened to a mere sprinkle, a gentle sigh of farewell as the night began its slow retreat. Persephone stretched, a luxurious, unhurried movement, then jumped onto my lap, her soft weight a grounding presence. The official conclusion, a voluntary disappearance, felt utterly inadequate in the face of my great-grandmother's detailed, albeit subjective, observations. The profound stillness, the unidentifiable hum, Lily's ancient song, Elias's whispered words of a threshold. These were not the hallmarks of a family fleeing debt or seeking a new life. They were the subtle tremors of a different kind of departure. What truly happened to the Thorne family that summer night in 1912? Did Elias, driven by his scholarly curiosity and a profound sensitivity to hidden energies, uncover a secret of the Whispering Woods, a gateway to a realm beyond our ordinary understanding? Did he, perhaps with Martha's loving support and Lily's innocent perception, step through that threshold, drawn by the secret song and the unique vibration of the ancient standing stones? The thought, while unprovable, offered a strange kind of comfort. It implied not tragedy or suffering, but a profound, almost spiritual journey. It suggested that they hadn't simply vanished, but had transitioned, moved to a different state of being, a new path that led elsewhere. The oil lamp flickered, a tiny beacon in the vast darkness of the attic. The scent of old paper and forgotten time mingled with the sweet aroma of spiced cider. Havenwood, for all its quiet charm, held its secrets close, woven into the very fabric of its ancient woods and whispered legends. The Thorne family's disappearance remained an open question, a subtle echo in the quiet valleys of the Catskills. And perhaps that was the way it was meant to be. Some mysteries, the most profound ones, are not about definitive answers, but about the enduring power of the unknown, the subtle pull of the inexplicable, and the quiet, captivating beauty of a truth that remains just beyond our grasp. As the first faint streaks of dawn began to paint the sky with soft mauves and grays, and the rain finally ceased, leaving behind a fresh, clean world, I felt a deep sense of connection to my great-grandmother and to the quiet, unsolved story she had so carefully preserved. I knew I would continue to delve into the archives, to listen to the whispers of the past, and to let the enduring enigma of the Thorne family resonate in the quiet corners of my mind. For in Havenwood, some stories are not about finding the truth, but about embracing the beautiful, persistent question mark that hangs in the air, inviting us to ponder the world beyond our understanding. Story 7. The old lighthouse keeper's cottage, where I now reside, always hums with the gentle murmur of the sea. Tonight, the rhythmic whoosh and sigh of the waves breaking on the rocky shore below are particularly soothing, a steady pulse against the ancient stone walls. A sliver of moonlight, filtered through the salt-kissed panes of my window, cuts across the worn wooden floor, illuminating dust motes dancing in the cool air. My mug of warm milk, sweetened with a touch of local honey, rests on the sturdy oak table beside me, its comforting warmth a counterpoint to the subtle chill that always seems to linger in these old maritime homes. The faint scent of brine and beeswax from the polished banisters fills the air, a timeless aroma. I came to the remote coastal town of Port Blossom, nestled on a craggy inlet of the Maine coast, several years ago, seeking a quiet harbor after a long career as an archival historian. I had spent my life sifting through the layers of the past, But it was here, in this seemingly tranquil corner of the world, that I stumbled upon a story that truly captured my imagination. A quiet, persistent enigma that has refused to be neatly categorized. My particular fascination centers on the perplexing disappearance of the crew of the Orion, a small fishing schooner, on a calm spring night in 1903. It's not a well-known maritime mystery, no grand headlines or international investigations. Here in Port Blossom, it's simply a quiet, sorrowful tale passed down through generations, a shadow lengthening from the past. The few official records, housed in the dusty old Port Authority building, are frustratingly brief and ultimately inconclusive, pointing to an accidental loss at sea, a rogue wave, or a sudden squall that simply went unrecorded. But the whispers, the unspoken observations that still linger in the salty air, tell a different story. There were 3 men aboard the Orion. Captain Elias Thorne, a taciturn man with eyes the color of the deep sea. His young deckhand, Finn, barely 18, full of the boundless optimism of youth. And a quiet, experienced fisherman named Silas, who had spent his entire life coaxing a living from these very waters. They set out on a perfectly clear evening in late April, the stars already beginning to pepper the twilight sky, promising to return with a bountiful catch by morning. They never did. The schooner itself was found 3 days later, drifting aimlessly in the still, glassy waters of the Outer Banks, far from its usual fishing grounds. Its sails were neatly furled, its fishing lines coiled, and the small cabin tidy. There was no sign of damage to the hull, no broken masts, no signs of a struggle. The compass was spinning aimlessly, and the ship's logbook was open on the chart table, its last entry simply, clear skies. Good fishing. But of Captain Thorne, Finn, or Silas, there was no trace. They had simply vanished from a perfectly calm, intact vessel, leaving behind only their empty presence. Tonight, my attention is fixed on a series of letters I recently discovered in the attic of the town's oldest general store, a collection of correspondence from the store owner's great-aunt, Ilara Vance. Ilara was a keen observer of Port Blossom life, a quiet woman who kept a detailed diary and exchanged frequent letters with her sister, who lived in a distant city. Her handwriting, delicate and precise, now unfolds under the soft lamplight, revealing the nuances of a time long past. The rhythmic crash of the waves outside seems to intensify slightly, a deep, resonant sound that feels almost like a heartbeat. My old black cat, Barnaby, a creature of profound stillness, twitched an ear and opened one emerald eye, his gaze fixed on some unseen shadow in the corner of the room, before settling back into his peaceful slumber on the hearth rug. Ilara's initial letters, written in the weeks leading up to the Orion's disappearance, were filled with the usual gossip of a small coastal town. The upcoming spring festival, the promise of a good fishing season, the occasional squabble over fishing rights. But then, a subtle change began to weave itself into her descriptions of Captain Thorne. Captain Thorne, she wrote, her penmanship still elegant, but with a faint tension now evident in the strokes, has grown strangely quiet these past few weeks. He used to be a man of few words, but now he is entirely still. He spends his evenings not in the Mariner's Rest, but by the old dock, simply gazing out to sea, long after the other boats have come in. It is as if he is listening to something only he can hear from the depths. I paused, picturing it, a seasoned sailor, whose life was intrinsically tied to the sea, suddenly consumed by an unusual stillness, a profound sense of listening. What could he have been hearing, or anticipating, out there in the vast, indifferent ocean? Ilara's subsequent letters deepen the unsettling atmosphere, hinting at a shared unease among the townsfolk concerning Captain Thorne. Old Man Tiber, the oldest fisherman in town, spoke to me today of Captain Thorne, she penned, the date now mid-April, just days before the disappearance. He says Thorne has been asking peculiar questions about the singing depths, a legend whispered among the old-timers of a place far out at sea where the currents hum with an otherworldly melody. Tiber says only madmen or fools seek the singing depths, for those who truly hear its song are never quite the same. He fears Thorne is being drawn in, the singing depths. An otherworldly melody, the language of folklore and ancient maritime superstition, hinting at something beyond the mundane hazards of the sea. This wasn't the language of a sudden squall or a hidden reef. It spoke of a different kind of peril, a different kind of pull. The light from my lamp flickered slightly, a brief dance of shadows on the wall before settling back into its steady glow. The scent of brine seemed to grow stronger, as if carried on an unseen current into the room. Ilara's final letter, dated April 29, 1903, the very day the Orion vanished, was shorter, more hurried, almost breathless in its urgency. The fog rolled in thick and fast tonight, a blanket smothering the stars. I saw the Orion sail out just before sunset, a small silhouette against the fading light. And I heard it, just faintly, carried on the mist. Not the usual sounds of the sea, but a low, resonant hum, a melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was beautiful, Agnes, and terrifying. The old fishermen say it is the song of the singing depths, finally calling. And I saw Captain Thorne standing at the helm, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the ship's lantern, looking not like a man setting out for a fishing trip, but like a man embarking on a pilgrimage. His eyes, they held a strange, serene knowing. He seemed to be answering a call. I fear for them, Agnes, for what they have found, or what has found them out there in the depths. Her handwriting, usually so precise, was almost a scrawl in these final lines. Answering a call. The phrase hung in the air, echoing the profound emptiness left by the vanished schooner. I closed the letter gently, its brittle paper rustling softly, a whisper from the past. The rhythmic crash of the waves outside continued, a steady, ancient pulse. Barnaby stretched languidly, his eyes still fixed on that unseen point, as if he too sensed the echoes of the Orion's final journey. The official conclusion, a simple loss at sea due to unforeseen conditions, felt utterly inadequate in the face of Alara Vance's vivid, albeit subjective, account. The perfectly intact schooner, the lack of distress, the inexplicable silence, Old Man Tiber's warnings, and Alara's chilling description of a resonant hum and Captain Thorne's serene knowing. These were not the hallmarks of a routine fishing accident. They were the subtle tremors of a different kind of departure. What truly happened to Captain Thorne, Finn, and Silas that clear spring night in 1903? Did Captain Thorne, perhaps through a deep, almost mystical connection to the sea, truly find the fabled singing depths? Did its otherworldly melody draw them, not into a watery grave, but into a different kind of existence, a liminal space, where the boundaries between life and something else blurred and dissolved? The thought, while unprovable, offered a strange sense of solace. It implied not suffering or struggle, but a journey of profound, perhaps even willing, transformation. It suggested that they hadn't simply perished, but had moved beyond, into a realm where the sea's ancient song held them forever. The moonlight had shifted, now painting a cool, silver stripe across my bed. The scent of brine and beeswax lingered, a timeless aroma that seemed to carry the enduring mystery of the Orion's vanished crew. Port Blossom, for all its tranquil beauty, held its secrets close, whispered by the tides and etched into the weathered faces of its oldest residents. The disappearance of the Orion remains an open question, a haunting melody in the quiet heart of this coastal town. And perhaps that is precisely the point. Some mysteries, the most profound ones, are not about definitive answers, but about the enduring power of the unknown, the subtle pull of the inexplicable, and the quiet, captivating beauty of a truth that remains just beyond our grasp. As the first faint streaks of dawn began to paint the sky with soft, pearlescent hues, and the waves continued their timeless rhythm, I knew I would keep returning to this story. Not to solve it, perhaps, but to sit with it, to ponder its quiet complexities, and to let the enduring enigma of the Orion's final voyage continue to hum its secrets through the salty air of Port Blossom. For some truths, the most intriguing ones, are found not in certainty, but in the quiet, comforting embrace of the unanswered question, a gentle lullaby whispered by the sea itself.